I'm obviously delighted and honored to be here. This is not my first visit to Bhubaneswar, but in this capacity, yes. I almost ended up missing this event, and I couldn't bear to think that what Mr. Singh would do with me, perhaps strangle me when he'd come across me on the street. So to live a little longer, I decided to come here to Bhubaneswar, and I'm quite delighted to note that there is a fair degree of interest in what I'm going to say. And what I'm going to say is not your usual view on India-Pakistan, because I have some very strong views, and they're not based on biases. They're based on whatever little I have been able to understand about the relationship between the two countries. But first, to touch on a few key issues. Mr. Chandrasekhar did throw up some wonderful ideas, but to start with, the point about integration in South Asia. As far as Pakistan is concerned, they see integration as a ploy by the Indian mind to quietly absorb Pakistan back into its fold. They feel India has never gotten over the fact that Pakistan left them, although Gandhiji and Nehru had both given assurances to Pakistan that if we didn't want partition, we wouldn't have let it happen. But it happened when both sides reached a point, whatever the arguments of the hardliners in Pakistan, but they reached a point where Jinnah and many of his followers were able to convince people that we are actually two separate nations. I don't buy that argument. But since that has come to be, the lines have been drawn, I don't think we are going to be able to undo that very easily. More importantly, when you talk about integration of the region, I think the Indian government currently has the singular distinction of undoing good relations with neighbors even where it existed. So I do not know how they can actually bridge the gap with Pakistan. Because on one side, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government seems to be obsessed with the fact that you can't choose your neighbors. Since you have what you have in your neighborhood, you must build better relations with Pakistan. But I am quite, in my own way, quite willing to stick my neck out and say that perhaps the Prime Minister has more than a personal agenda. As far as our other neighbors are concerned, you have Sri Lanka, who we have had traditionally good relations with, but to appease a handful of Tamil politicians, we have squandered that relationship, at least for the time being. You had Sheikh Hasina's government, which has gone out of the way to have good relations with India and actually stuck its neck out in Bangladeshi politics, but you've not been able to deliver on any of the promises. So she goes back to the elections now with nothing to show with India-Bangladesh relations, because again a regional politician, Mamta Banerjee, put the brakes and we couldn't really deliver to Bangladesh. I mean, if you talk to people objectively, you understand the Teesta water dispute. We get more water from the Teesta anyway to start with. And even after the arrangement, all that Bangladesh is asking for is equal sharing of waters. But anyway, I'm going into a separate realm. My point is that where we've had good relations, we've not been able to garner that, but we want to continue to build new ground. Perhaps that might put us on the world stage, or at least a handful of individuals, to seek international awards and accolades for having had peace with a neighbor who the world thought it was not possible. A Nobel Peace Prize cannot be beyond their imagination. But what is really the problem? What is the problem? Why are India and Pakistan at loggerheads? I am quite convinced, whatever Pakistani hardliners might say, but I'm quite convinced that Pakistan needs the enmity with India to keep itself together. Pakistan does not have any other rallying point. The best definition of a Pakistani is one who is not Indian. And the best bonding adhesive is anti-Indianism, symbolized by the betrayal over Kashmir. This brings me to Kashmir. What is really the core issue behind Kashmir? The core issue behind Kashmir is that Pakistan believes that the word AK in Pakistan is Azad Kashmir, and though the idea of Pakistan came about by a handful of eccentrics in Cambridge University in 1932-33, Rahmat Ali leading them, this idea kind of died its own death till it was revived once again by the British, not by Jinnah or Gandhi. It was revived by the British, who wanted to create a buffer state in what we now call roughly the AFPAC region on the map, which is really the frontier regions of Pakistan, because they feared the expansion of the Russian bear into the Indian subcontinent would take away from the British, as their power was dwindling, the jewel in the crown. If nothing else, I could recommend, as I'll go along, I'll recommend a few books that you might like to read. And these are written by sensible, responsible people, well-researched, footnoted, and what have you, so they're not talking through their hat. There's a book by Narinder Singh Sarila, former secretary in the MEA, told the great game, the great game revisited, the story of partition untold, in which he has argued that the need to create this buffer in the AFPAC region led the British to find somebody who could actually lead that buffer state. And the then Aga Khan suggested the name of Mr. Jinnah, who was also an Ismaili and an Aga Khan follower and a very prominent lawyer, to actually lead that front. Jinnah came into prominence more so because Nehru and others had refused to listen to the British diktat of sending Indian troops to battle in World War II unless the British were willing to make a public announcement that India would get independence for its contribution in World War II. And because the British were not willing to give the commitment to independence, Nehru and others ended up in jail, and they cleared the path for Jinnah to actually establish himself as a leader of the Muslim community. And Jinnah continued to argue on the basis of that the Muslims were a separate entity in India. I don't accept that, because subsequent to all those years of partition and beyond, I mean, every Muslim who has wanted to go out and excel in India has never been stopped. And people have risen to the highest ranks and achieved the highest distinction in this country without any bias. So I think that Pakistani thesis has fallen flat, and they need to keep that alive, and therefore they look for straws in the wind, whether it's Babri Masjid, a defunct mosque, which many people rallied themselves around, not realizing that the patron saint of Muslim communities world over, Saudi Arabia, did away with a lot of mosques when they were building their highways and had no time for them. So I don't see any reason why so much of tear shedding was done over a mosque. A mosque is a place of worship. I mean, you move on, the mosque moves on, period. You know, I don't see any reason to make such a big thing out of it. But anyway, so Pakistan's been looking for these straws in the wind. So what happened? Really, at independence and beyond, Kashmir became the place where the clock stopped. Why? Because out of 583 principalities that made up India, not one, I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, not one, and I'm not saying this, the Congressional Research Service in Washington says it in a document, that not one opted to join Pakistan on midnight 14th August, 15th August, which was the deadline given by the Partition Committee. And therefore, Mr. Jinnah and all were embarrassed. They were looking for straws in the wind. The first such one came from Junagadh, where the princely king of Junagadh, who was actually quite fond of wildlife and his dogs, flew off to Karachi with his Diwan, who was Zulfikar Bhutto's father, but left his Begums behind, and announced in Karachi that he wants to join Pakistan. India is not letting him. And subsequently there was Hyderabad and various others, and there was Bhopal, and there was even Kerala, which was then known as Travancore, were all looking for deals with Pakistan. But none of them really fructified, because India did not want to accept a broken up India with bits and pieces of Pakistan all over. What Pakistan really got was a line drawn by a British barrister called Cyril Ratcliffe, who came to India, and he did in 6 weeks what should have taken at least 12 months to do. He picked up census maps and gave Pakistan to a lot of people who did not want a Pakistan. Because the idea of Pakistan came about by the Muslims of the Cow Belt, UP, Bihar and MP, who felt insecure in a possible Hindu India after independence. But Nehru and others, post-independence and some of the big debates in the Constituent Assembly, did away with the argument that Hindi should be the language of the state. It was given the status of official language, but so were a number of vernacular languages given the status of officially recognized, as you can see in an Indian currency note. So I think that was one of Nehru's great achievements. The other thing was that there was an argument that, since India is majority Hindu country, it should become a Hindu country. Again, Nehru and others put their foot down. So therefore, the fears of those who felt insecure in a possible India which would be Hindu dominated, those fears never came alive. And those who ended up getting Pakistan didn't want it because they were 99% majority in parts of Pakistan where there was sprinkling of Hindus. So as Mani Shankar Iyer says, and here's another book I would suggest, Pakistan Papers, which is his document, his writings on Pakistan. And he said that those who got Pakistan didn't want to hear the mullah's azan without 6 whiskeys inside them. And they said, ye kya qayamat aa gayi hamare upar. So the problem was that those who inherited Pakistan didn't want it. Those who wanted Pakistan didn't get it. And therefore the process of partition took place, which was the most shoddily organized movement of people, of which Mr. Batra and others, their families have been victims of, and rightly so, because it was a terrible period. Suddenly you are uprooted from your home. Khushwant Singh's book, Train to Pakistan, is one of those books which recalls those horrors. But more recently, if you saw the movie Bhag Milkha Bhag, again brought out that sentiment. The point was the partition took place because Mountbatten, in all his idealism, some of which was probably Nehru's idealism, which rubbed off on Mountbatten, suddenly decided to do away with the boundary commission, the boundary police force, and provided no security to people moving either way. So there were millions of people who were made homeless, lost lives, and it was a complete mess. In all that mess came about a sentiment in Pakistan, because those who went there became distinctly anti-Indian. Many of them who came here obviously carried those wounds. And in all that sentiment came away that rivalry, because what happened during partition also was the partition of the armed forces. Because the British argument was, and why partition took place, and a central point must be understood, that there was a 3-point reference which was given by the British. Sir Cyril Ratcliffe, who was the lawyer, who was asked to divide India and Pakistan, and he did it purely on the basis of census maps, because he came to Delhi and got a Delhi belly, so he didn't shift out of Delhi. So being sitting around, he decided to divide a country where there was no division required. At the level he did the division. And those who wanted the division, he didn't want to go and seek their sentiment and understand. So you were saddled with an idea which was a historic blunder of massive proportions. But then in the eyes of those who inherited Pakistan, one of the things was their feeling that India had made actually a very systematic attempt to cripple Pakistan. 4 or 5 things happened. The division of the army took place. 66% stayed on in India by virtue of its size. 34% went there. But the equipment that the Pakistan army got could not move in the partition riots. So therefore, the equipment depots in Pune, Jabalpur and various other places, trains were not allowed to move because for fear the equipment and weapons would be stolen and used to further escalate the deaths and killing during the riots, partition riots. So Pakistan felt that this was a smart Indian ploy not to give them weapon systems, which they needed. They felt that India wanted to cripple a Pakistan at its birth. The second thing was that the distribution of funds at the Reserve Bank of India was held up because of some petty rivalry at clerical level. Eventually, Sardar Patel moved in and got the money released to Pakistan. The third was that there was a drought in what is Pakistan's heartland in Punjab. And the waters from the Indus water systems, which make up the 5 rivers that even cultivate Pakistan, did not reach Pakistan, and therefore their crops suffered. They felt India had stopped the water. You can't stop water, but they felt India had stopped the water. So there was another fear and rivalry. And in fact, their entire argument on Kashmir, which has been propagated on a Muslim context, is actually an argument for getting the water systems assured to Pakistan, because even now they argue that the water distribution is unfair. They do not want to accept that their water management is poor. And therefore, a lot of water that goes into Pakistan, eventually you can't stop water. You can just divert it a bit. And those diversions are now limited to treaties where Ayub Khan had arranged with India, the Indus Water Treaty, wherein the distribution of the waters. A good reference point for understanding that is, please read the speech of the then Indian High Commissioner a few years ago in Islamabad. He spoke at the Karachi Press Club. His name is Mr. Sabarwal. It's in Google. You can read about water distribution. But basically, we are not using all the water that we are authorized. It was a World Bank brokered deal. Pakistan is using, but they're mismanaging. But they again believe India wants to suck them dry. So what happened in Kashmir? Kashmir, couple of things happened. The Maharaja of Kashmir struck a deal with the Pakistanis called a standstill agreement for a 90-day period. In that 90-day period, the Maharaja's mismanagement got the better of him and there were rebellion and riots against him. Maharaja did not strike a deal with India because Nehru and others were wanting him to accede to the Indian Union. What was accession? Accession was based on 3 points. One was that if your landmass of a principality, as I said, 583 principalities, if your landmass of a principality was touching the land of Pakistan as defined in the maps made by Cyril Ratcliffe, they call it contiguous to the land, then you had the choice of opting for Pakistan, provided the population in majority was Muslim and the ruler was Muslim. But if the ruler's religion was different from the majority, as in case of J&K, the ruler's will finally would prevail. Therefore, Kashmir did not accede, even if it wanted to Pakistan, because eventually the ruler decided to sign the Treaty of Accession and join India on 26th October 1947, when there were rebellions against when there were rebellions against the king's misrule in Poonch Naushera area, which is what you hear about on the LOC. And Pakistan sent a number of military men disguised as irregulars, which they have continued to do over the years, and therefore everything I say on Pakistan is very easy for me, because if you understand the history, you'll know that's how they'll behave in the future also. So they sent a force led by a gentleman called Major General Akbar Khan. His military name was General Tariq. He led this Kabila force and they got disorganized and went into rape and plunder and couldn't get Srinagar by 27th of October 1947, which if you look back into the calendar, check it out on Google, was meant to be Eid. And they had hoped Jinnah Sahab would lead the prayers in Srinagar's Jama Masjid and name it Iqbalabad after Allama Iqbal, who by the way also wrote that famous poem, Sare Jahan Se Achha Hindustan Hamara. He later changed colors. So any case, but the problem for Pakistan, which they never anticipated, one, was how swiftly India would react, and secondly, the Jinnah did not know how to say namaz, so how would he lead the prayers? That was one of the ironies of Pakistan. But anyway, so Pakistan was founded as an Islamic nation by a person who was not a practicing Muslim. But having said that, Kashmir acceded to India. India joined issue with Pakistan militarily, and where the trenches were dug and snowfall filled up was where eventually the ceasefire line came into being, which is today called the line of control with a few modifications. So the ceasefire line agreement, and here is an interesting point you need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the ceasefire line agreement was completely brokered and signed by military officers on both sides, and whatever the Pakistani military signs, they respect. If Nawaz Sharif or others sign any piece of paper like the Lahore Declaration, they tear it and throw it in the waste bin. That is Pakistan. Unfortunately, our political leadership is unable to understand, partly because they don't want to, partly because they have some kind of romantic delusion about what relations with Pakistan will be. The next point is that once you had that relationship with Pakistan, they tried in 47, 48, they couldn't get Kashmir militarily. Some think tanks in America told them that if you go into war once again with a few mistakes, which you didn't make last time, you can probably take Kashmir over. So Bhutto prodded Ayub Khan into attempting to take Kashmir back from India, and that was in 65. It was a two-part operation. Part one was to send irregulars in who were caught by the Kashmiris, handed over to the police. By then, the anti-India sentiment was not high in Kashmir of the nature it is now. So Kashmiris were then very supportive of the Union of India and the police structures, and they abided by it. Unfortunately, we have squandered that goodwill, and that's a separate debate. We can go into it later. Then you had the 71 war. 71 war was again initiative because of Bhutto's adamance. Because Bhutto did not want to accept Sheikh Mujib as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, even though he won 160 out of 162 seats in the elections. Bhutto had won 82 out of 98 seats. But because they didn't, Bangladeshis rebelled, there was genocide, there was a military operation. Yes, we were involved. The dates that have been given about the military operations are relatively incorrect, because the dates which we officially say is 3rd December, but the war actually started on 22nd November. You may like to read General Jacob's book, Liberation of Dhaka, or more recently his book, An Odyssey in War and Peace. Those facts are all out there. So therefore, and I've made a humble contribution also on the subject of Kashmir and wars with Pakistan. It's called Wars and No Peace Over Kashmir by myself, Maroof Raza, published by Lancers. So lots of facts, lot of data is there. Why I'm quoting the books, because those of you who are interested to do follow-up reading, you can do that. But the liberation of Bangladesh became a big stone around the neck of the Pakistani military. The Hamadur Rahman report humiliated them for not reacting to the situation. And when General Niazi was asked, when you had 27,400 soldiers in Dhaka and India had 3,600 surrounding Dhaka, why did you surrender? He said, Jacob bluffed me, which is true. I think the credit goes to General Jacob, who was later governor of Punjab also. And I've had long interactions with General Jacob, and he actually outsmarted Niazi, and he just said that we are all over the place and we'll just, kill you like dogs. And Niazi surrendered. So that is history. And Pakistan's National Defense College, in their document of the 71 war, actually acknowledges this. It's there on the internet also. So we've had 3 wars. So where do we go from there? Then you had General Zia, who came in, the first jihadi head of state. I share the same college pedigree as Zia. He's the most famous product that we have from St. Stephen's College. But anyway, Zia decided to Islamize an Islamic Pakistan. And that was really Zia's problem. But in terms of security relationships, there is a book by Robert Weir Singh of University of California called The Security of Pakistan under General Zia, the Concerns of a Peripheral Asian State. And you must read it because there are 3 issues there: the Siachen issue, the Kashmir issue, and the nuclear issue, and the Afghan issue interlinked with it. So anyway, in Zia's time, Pakistan suddenly, from an Islamic despotic state, suddenly became the bulwark of the West against Russian expansion in Afghanistan. Pakistan got very heavily involved in Afghanistan, so for a moment, our attention was away, and we thought, Pakistan's going to get embroiled there in the quicksand of Afghanistan. There is a book called The Bear Hug, which gives the entire relationship of the Pakistani military and the ISI, which really came into prominence during the Afghanistan years, 79 to Russian invasion, 79 to 87. But that was the time that Pakistan used to buy weapons in the pretext of using them in Afghanistan, but stashed away large sums of those to be used against India and Kashmir, as they later said, हमने जश्न में काबुल मना लिया, अब चलो कश्मीर चलो. So that was their agenda. This has been articulated in great detail and put together in a document by Chris Smith of King's College London, which is called The Proliferation of Small Arms in South Asia. All the details are in it. Pakistan became a beneficiary of the so-called Kalashnikov pipeline, funded by the Americans in the hope that the Soviets will be pushed out from there. And that is why the Americans have always been too embarrassed to admit in detail their deep relationship with Pakistan, which even led to the creation of Osama bin Laden. And they knew that Pakistan knows a lot about Osama, and they know all the details, and that's why they did the operation in Abbottabad in secrecy, which was another big slap on the face of the Pakistan military. Only on 2 occasions in Pakistan's history, their military has been summoned by their parliamentarians to answer. One was after the humiliation in Bangladesh, one was after Osama bin Laden's killing, which was also a humiliation for the military. Otherwise, nobody touches their military. And for those of us who believe that with elections, Nawaz Sharif is going to become stronger and stronger, we have to wait and watch, because their military is the largest political party in Pakistan. They are also the richest institution in Pakistan. When America talks of cutting off $1.5 billion worth of funding in Pakistan and says that we can arm twist them, the military smiles, because they have their private earnings of $15 to $20 billion from private investments under an agency called the Fauji Foundation, which was set up by the military with the money the British gave them after independence. And they set up a consortium of hospitals, transportation agencies, business empires, etc. India distributed money to each individual soldier who was involved in the war. So we didn't keep a consolidated fund. They made an empire out of that fund. So you cannot, I mean, you don't have, Pakistan's politicians can really, I mean, it's going to be a long time before they can actually even talk to their military the way our politicians do. So where are we now? I mean, there are 3 or 4 areas which are of concern to me. Kashmir issue, please remember, it will remain central to Pakistan's thinking in the absence of us or the world or the Pakistani leadership coming up with some rallying point for Pakistan where they begin to feel proud of. Pakistan lives with the big question which nobody has answers to. Is Pakistan going to be an Islamic state like Saudi Arabia? Or should Pakistan become a nation of Muslims like Malaysia? They don't have an answer to that. And therefore, the best answer to rally people in Pakistan together is hatred for India. Now, yes, there are the singers who come to Bollywood. There are the traders who do trade. There are the people who have dinners with you in Dubai. But that's all very well till you raise the Kashmir issue. More importantly, Pakistan is now what we see in Pakistan, the people that we exchange, Kuldeep Nair and other distinguished luminaries exchange candles with on Wagah border, those people are the fringe in Pakistan. The mainstream are the minions of Hafiz Saeed. And if you don't believe me, read a piece by Aisha Siddiqa, who is an eminent writer in Pakistan, and she's written a book called Military INC, and subsequently she writes for Hindustan Times. More recently, Khalid Ahmed writes in the Indian Express. He wrote one yesterday, a very good piece in the Indian Express, where he says that the Pakistani army chief was last year declared the 28th most powerful man in the world. But if you actually declare, if you actually put a tag on Hafiz Saeed's head, he'll probably be in the top 10 most powerful men in the world. And Pakistan's politicians and the military are both doing the ostrich act, not wanting to name who's really behind all their problems. If you don't if you want to know more details, you can read 2 interesting books. One is by Stephen Tankill of King's College London, who's written the book Storming the World Stage, The History of the Lashkar-e-Toiba. And more recently, you can read a book by Murtaza Razvi, who's written a book, The Musharraf Years. Why did Musharraf run into problems? Musharraf ran into problems because he actually confronted the jihadis in the Lal Mosque, Lal Masjid. After that, it was all downhill for them. Pakistanis keep arguing that their internal problems are based on India sponsoring and supporting Baluchis. I asked the Pakistanis in many debates, I said, granted that we may be doing it for the last 10 years, ever since we got involved in Afghanistan post 9/11. But how is it that the problem was festering with you for 60 years? Where were we? And Pakistani scholar Akbar S. Ahmed, recently in a very good book which I reviewed for India Today, called The Thistle and the Drone, has written a full chapter on the Baluchi problem and a full chapter on Osama bin Laden. And there is no mention of India. So these are Pakistani scholars who are honest enough to write. I don't know how long they live for writing all that, but the fact of the matter is they write. So we are faced with that situation. So there are 3 or 4 other quick points I wish to make, because I don't want to take up too much time. I've stuck to my 20 odd minutes. The first point is about terrorism. Yes, terrorism will continue because it is the tool that Pakistan's military feels is the best strategic asset they have to keep India on the run. Our weak leadership further emboldens them that yes, you can push India like you did with 26/11, and India can do nothing else except hand over dossiers to us, which we will then dismiss as pure literature, right? The second thing is, as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, Western analysts have the same problem that Indian analysts have with Pakistan. Western analysts look at Pakistan-India relations like they looked at East-West relations in the Cold War. Indians look at Pakistan from an Indian political prism कि Prime Minister आ गया अब सब ठीक हो जाएगा. But it will not be so. The Prime Minister, until now, with the new chief, General Sharif, who's taking over, is not only hails from Kashmir like Nawaz Sharif, but also is a Lahori buddy of theirs. So I think they may be able to work out an arrangement where the chief focuses more on internal conflicts and Sharif focuses more on the economy. The chances for both to deliver are probably 3 out of 10. Now, the last issue about nuclear issues. There is always that fear we are two nuclear armed neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, please understand a few facts. One is, nuclear weapons are not weapons that you fight wars with. Nuclear weapons prevent wars. And those who have nuclear weapons understand the sheer magnitude of the effect it has in the event of war. And on two occasions when Pakistan had suggested after Indian military deployment that they might use nuclear weapons if we push them too hard, and initially the government of India panicked because our political leadership have no idea of strategic issues and they neither want to understand. Stephen Cohen, the old guru of India-Pakistan relations at Brookings, whose books which are worth reading, most recently The Future of Pakistan, and earlier The Idea of Pakistan, and then one Engaging India. These are books by Steve Cohen, and Steve Cohen was kind enough to write the foreword to my last book on terrorism called Confronting Terrorism by Penguin. And Steve Cohen told me over dinner once in Washington that India has probably 2.5 people in the parliament who understand foreign policy and strategic issues. Now, you want to be a great power, but you don't understand what it means to be a great power. Being a great power is not being a lackey of the United States. Being a great power is standing up for what you believe. And I tell you one thing, Japan, a country of 100+ million people, has shown more spine than our country has, which has 1.2 billion people the size of Africa, has shown spine vis-a-vis Pakistan after 26/11. We could have done many things with Pakistan and not gone to war. I am not an advocate of war, but ladies and gentlemen, the first film that was shown here is Kab Tak Chalegi Ye Ladai. But let me tell you, the absence of conflict doesn't mean there is going to be peace. You can only reap the dividend of peace if you understand war. If you don't understand war, you can't even articulate what is your vision of peace. So that is the message I want to leave with you. Yes, brotherhood and all that sounds very good over a cup of coffee and kappi pappi jhappi, as the Punjabis say, but that's not going to work. What's going to work is nations are great because they can speak from a position of strength. We have the capacity, we have the people, but unfortunately, we feel that we will only address our foreign policy and security challenges when the next crisis will come. The next time, you may just not get that much reaction time. And that is what you need to constantly keep abreast of. A small footnote, Obama and every American president takes 2 days off every year to sit quietly with his military commanders and understand America's military and strategic options. It is not that he wants to bomb the world out. By the way, he's a winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. But what he needs to understand is force to use, if required, in terms of coercive diplomacy. And that is something that our leadership has failed to understand. We want to bridge gaps only with trade. Trade can only work if the environment is conducive to trade. You cannot do dhanda with somebody whose look you cannot stand. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.